No, friends and neighbors, it is not clickbait. I am reacting to something else besides Star Wars. Believe it or not. What a concept, right? But, yes, it's Jedi Phoenix with you once again. Glad to have you here as always. If you're new to the channel or whether you're a returning viewer, either way, glad you're popping in. Hope your summer's going alright. We're in the middle of a heat wave here. Not pleasant. Hope you're staying cool and I hope you're staying safe. So I happened across this video. Superstars who aren't in the WWE Hall of Fame who should be. I used to watch a lot of wrestling once upon a time. About the late 80s all the way through the 90s. You know, the rock and wrestling era through the new generation, so-called new generation. And then the Attitude Era, the Monday Night Wars between WWF and WCW. You know, that was, all of that was my golden era. That was what I enjoyed the most. Sometime around near the end of the 90s, I started to lose interest. And I really don't watch much of it these days at all. The Hall of Fame, though, is something I do keep track of to see who's going in and who isn't. There is a lot of talent in there, deservedly so. But WWE doesn't always get it right. Two examples come to mind. One was Undertaker, who was inducted this year, 2022. He retired, excuse me, he retired in 2020. I thought he should have been inducted last year, like immediately. Why they waited an extra year, I don't know. The other one they got wrong, I think, was Vader. Or Big Van Vader, as he was called in WCW. His WCW run, I think, was more accomplished than what he did in WWE. But still, you know, it was a Hall of Fame career. When he found out that he was dying, I think it was congestive heart failure, he even asked them to induct him while he was alive to receive it. Him getting inducted was a shoo-in. It was a given. But he wanted to be inducted while he was still alive, and they didn't do it. They inducted him this year, 2022, after he had already passed. So, yeah, great, he's in. Too little, too late as far as I'm concerned. But this will be interesting to see what list this, who's on this list. This was uploaded earlier this week. And as it happens, I'm recording this video coincidentally the day after Vince McMahon announced his retirement from WWE, that he was stepping down. So I have a feeling that maybe some of the people on this list, maybe they're not in because he doesn't want them in. And maybe if he really has nothing to do with WWE anymore behind the scenes, maybe that'll change. I don't know. I can think of two people, I'm not going to name names right now. I can think of two people not in the Hall of Fame. They probably won't ever be in the Hall of Fame for different reasons. And if you think about it, maybe you can think of the same people too. But whatever. Let's get to it. I think I've rambled enough. Incidentally, I'm going to leave a link for this original video in the description for my video. If you want to watch that first, free of my interruptions and discussion, and then come back here to watch my reaction to it, feel free. Alright, we are recording now. Alright. Let's see what we got. Catchy tune. Oh, the model. Lex Luger, yeah, okay. They're not in it yet? Demolition? Oh, time. Is this implying that Elizabeth isn't in the Hall of Fame yet? Or Demolition, for that matter? Really? How can they not be in the Hall of Fame? Either one of them. Demolition was, back in their day, one of, if not the dominant tag team. And Elizabeth, come on. How's Macho Man and she isn't? Not. Maybe the video will elaborate. Maybe call this a knee-jerk reaction. Let's move on. Brian Pillman, bam. See, all these guys are worthy of it. Well, Heyman's still active. I get why he's not.
The WWE Hall of Fame is a topic that has fans split. Some say it is an honour to get inducted during WrestleMania weekend, and others believe the Hall of Fame doesn't hold any merit whatsoever, seeing as it features hand-picked superstars with no sort of voting system or committee selecting inductees. Basically, it comes down to Vince McMahon's approval. When you hear the speeches though, or listen to interviews from legends after their inductions, and when you see a legend getting recognised for their body of work and getting a chance to stand on stage to thank those who helped them along the way, you can tell there's something to those getting the distinction. The Hall of Fame's one of my favourite things about WrestleMania weekend because I love listening to the old stories and learning a little more about the inductees from their point of view. I know I'm in the minority here too, and many of us missed the Hall of Fame ceremony during WrestleMania week. I do believe there should be some sort of vote or some other way of selecting inductees, but I still really enjoy watching the Hall of Fame, and I like seeing guys who I grew up with getting one more moment in the spotlight. You can see it's important to the inductees. With that being said, there's some glaring omissions from the Hall of Fame, and there's some folks who haven't been inducted that really should be. Seeing some of the people who have been inducted versus those who haven't makes you scratch your head sometimes, but in saying that, there's others who haven't been inducted because, quite simply, the WWE doesn't want to bring attention to those superstars, whether that's for a questionable past, issues with the law, a death that occurred where wrestling played a part in the wrestler no longer being with us. There's multiple reasons why a superstar won't get inducted, and some of those reasons are warranted, while others, I feel, should be dismissed. In today's video, I'm going to look at 10 superstars of the past who I believe should be inducted in the Hall of Fame. By the way, I know for a fact that many of the guys and girls in today's video will never get inducted, or they don't want to be inducted, and I know the reasons why. I don't want to explain why they won't get inducted.
That's an interesting point.
Trust me, I know why some of these guys
maybe they don't want it.
By WWE again, and I know why it's pointless thinking these guys will one day get the honor. I just want to make that clear before continuing on. I still want to talk about these guys though because I feel they contributed enough to earn a spot. Owen Hart will not be on today's list. Owen contributed.
That was one of my two.
WWF and a Hall of Fame induction has been talked about a lot, but that Dark Side of the Ring episode about Owen tells us all we need to know. In being selfish, I'd like to see him get inducted if I'm honest, but I also understand why he won't get inducted.
He deserves it, but his wife will never allow it.
The following names are in no particular order.
Owen Hart deserves it, but his wife will never allow it. Never in 1,000 years. Yeah, see? They deserve it.
X and Smash were one of the WWF's main tag teams from 1987 to 1990. 1991 saw the team get changed up when Bill Lady left the company, but the original team was one of the WWF's most prominent duos. They were originally seen as another Road Warriors ripoff, but they managed to carve out their own legacy by becoming three-time tag team champions at a time when the WWF had some pretty hot tag teams on the roster. Demolition worked with the Powers of Pain, the Hart Foundation, Strike Force.
The tag team scene in
and
the late
Colossal
80s
Connection,
was
among others, and they held
fantastic.
the record for the longest tag team title reign in history with an impressive 478-day reign. The record was held by Axe and Smash until the New Day broke it in 2016. Demolition, without a doubt, are one of the most recognizable tag teams of the late 80s and early 90s, but WWE are yet to recognize the team with a Hall of Fame induction. Bill Eadie believes that he and Barry Darsow haven't been inducted due to both guys being part of a class action lawsuit filed in 2016 against WWE. The lawsuit alleged that wrestlers incurred brain injuries during their tenure with the company, while the WWE concealed the risks of injury. There were 51 plaintiffs in the lawsuit, including guys like Ahmed Johnson, Shane Douglas, The Barbarian, Marty Jannetty, Sabu, and of course, Demolition.
Okay, well...
Something I've learned since starting this YouTube channel is that people loved Big Sid just for his sheer presence. Sid completely proves you don't need to be a work rate guy to make it in the world of wrestling, and what's more, Sid won the big one while guys like Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels were at the top of their game in late '96.
Yeah, I think his better career was in WCW
though. Big Sid Vicious and Dan Spivey formed the Skyscrapers tag team in WCW, and he became the muscle for Ric Flair's Four Horsemen faction.
Yeah.
He then appeared in the WWF where he headlined WrestleMania 8 with Hulk Hogan in a match that many fans felt that Sid should have won. Sid did eventually win the WWF title though at Survivor Series 1996, defeating Shawn Michaels and getting a great reaction from Madison Square Garden, even though Sid would drop the title to HBK and win it back shortly after from Bret Hart. He would then face The Undertaker in another WrestleMania main event, though he lost the title and his WWF appearances would then become a bit more sporadic. During his third WCW stint, Sid would become the Millennium Man and he would win the US title once and the World Heavyweight title twice. So with Sid's accomplishments in wrestling with these pay-per-view main events and title wins, it seems like he'd be a sure thing for a Hall of Fame induction. Sid says he doesn't feel like he deserves a Hall of Fame induction. He feels his career was cut too short due to his freak leg injury that occurred at WCW. And he feels he had way more to give the wrestling
freak injury is an understatement.
But I think I speak for most people when I say Sid definitely deserves his spot, and I'd like to see him get inducted one day.
He's done more than some other people who are in there, so...
When Miss Elizabeth passed away, the WWF were quick to cover the incident in their WWF Confidential show. The piece that aired on Confidential really put Lex in a bad light, and after that aired, neither Luger nor Liz were mentioned on WWF television ever again. It seems though that lately both parties have been more open to working with each other again with the upcoming A&E documentary coming out, and seeing as I don't know what that documentary is going to cover, I could be shooting myself in the foot here. But based on his career, I feel Luger should get his spot in the Hall of Fame, although there's also a chance it will never happen. Luger
he did more in WCW. Yeah, there's that.
Nitro, and then there's the aforementioned tragedy involving Luger and Miss Elizabeth. Most fans agree that Luger's first WCW run was his best run in any promotion. He was an associate of the Four Horsemen before becoming a full-time member. He won the US title 4 times during his initial stint, and he set the all-time record for the longest reign, 523 days. Luger also won the vacant world title at the 1991 Great American Bash when he defeated Barry Windham, so he had quite the list of accomplishments before joining WWF as the Narcissist. Luger's run as an all-American hero and the Lex Express stuff lives on.
I remember that.
The WWF tried and failed to make Lex Luger the next Hulk Hogan. Luger wasn't able to win the World Wrestling Federation Championship during this run, and the mega push died down considerably in 1994, but Lex stuck around until WCW Nitro debuted on TNT. During this second WCW run, Lex won the world title once again, though his victory was short-lived. But still, his popularity went through the roof when he supported WCW in their battle against the New World Order, and he became WCW's go-to babyface while Sting stayed out of in-ring action. Luger would join the NWO Wolfpack eventually, and he got reborn and renamed to just the Total Package. Things all fell apart for Lex though when Miss Elizabeth passed away, and in 2007 Luger suffered a nerve impingement in his neck, or a spinal stroke. It was said that Lex would make a full recovery, but he never did. He can walk short distances, but at present Lex relies on his wheelchair for all mobility. Lex found personal happiness in his faith, and it really seems like he's become a more humble individual who doesn't take things for granted like he maybe once did. I think he'd have a fascinating story to tell, and I do think his accomplishments in the ring earned him a spot in the Hall of Fame.
Alright, let me stop for a minute. Just to go over a couple of things. Both Luger and Sid, I think, had more accomplishments in WCW back in the day than they did WWF. And I know that Vince McMahon is more inclined to back his own creations than wrestlers who came in from elsewhere. Or at least he shows a little bit more favoritism, I think. Might be the better way to put it. So, prior to this week, maybe you could say that these two wouldn't get in. Sid's thinking that he's not deserving. I disagree with that. Like I said, he did a lot in WCW. His leg injury was really unfortunate. And when I say leg injury, I mean like Joe Theismann, leg disintegrated kind of injury. He did a spot off the top turnbuckle and landed wrong and just completely destroyed from the calf on down. But, you know, because of what he did in WCW, I think he should get in. Luger, yeah, he kind of backstabbed WWF when Nitro premiered, like they just said here. But if both sides are talking, who knows? He certainly had a Hall of Fame career, more from WCW than what he did in WWF. But since WWE owns WCW licenses now, you know. And again, if Vince McMahon truly is gone, if he doesn't have a say in it anymore, maybe. All right, let's move on. This was one of those guys you just love to boo.
While Rick Martel isn't a guy people associate with championship belts and marquee matches, I think his work as a character and an in-ring performer makes him a prime candidate for a Hall of Fame induction, although I do believe he also said he really wants nothing to do with pro wrestling anymore. It was the Can-Am connection and Strikeforce tag teams that first really showcased Martel to a worldwide audience, but I absolutely loved his work as the model, a vain heel who thought his good looks made him better than everyone else.
He was just one of those guys that you love to boo. Really.
Martel would walk down the ring with nothing but confidence, and in the ring he could certainly back it up. I don't think Martel gets enough credit for how fundamentally sound he was, and he's done a wonderful job of making people look better than what they really were. It confuses me that the model didn't get pushed.
He was a mid-carder, yeah, but he was good at what he did. He was
champion during the early 90s. Martel said he was getting ready to return to the World Wrestling Federation in 1997 along with Don Callis, but a pay dispute led to Martel signing with World Championship Wrestling in early 1998. Though unfortunately his run was cut short after a bad injury. He fractured his leg and tore an inside ligament in his right knee. He did return later in the year, but in his first match back he again got injured, effectively ending his in-ring career, although he did work backstage at WCW as a trainer and a host for French versions of WCW television shows. Brian Pillman had his fair share of problems after his car accident in 1996, and it's a shame the WWE see these issues as a reason not to induct Brian Pillman into their Hall of Fame. Brian was a standout at Stu Hart's Stampede Wrestling, but he gained recognition during his days as Flying Brian in WCW. His high-risk moveset excited fans, and he was one of the first guys in American wrestling to add a variety of aerial offense to his regular moveset. Brian and Steve Austin got together to create
that Steve Austin
named the Hollywood Blondes.
Yep.
And he made headlines as a loose cannon who seemingly went off script and caused chaos while the cameras were rolling, going on to make remarkable appearances in ECW before showing up again on Nitro briefly. And then he had a run with the Hart Foundation and the World Wrestling Federation that unfortunately didn't showcase what Brian was all about, mainly due to his injury and the self-medication he went through to deal with that injury.
Yeah,
Still, Brian has the honor of wrestling the very first Monday Nitro match on TNT. The Rogue Horseman confused and played with the fans, his peers, and the Dirt Sheet Riders by appearing on WCW, ECW, and the WWF in the same year, while keeping his cards close to his chest. He doesn't get the recognition he deserves for giving fans the first glimpse of WWF attitude with the infamous Pillman's Got a Gun segment, though Brian's entire career from start to end
that was
a hell of a story that should be talked about more.
Alright, let me pause it for a minute. Yeah, that whole Brian Pillman with a gun, that was edgy. Yeah, again, he had more accomplishments in WCW than WWF. And his death was a tragedy. And I hope that the reason for his death isn't why they're keeping him out of the Hall of Fame. Because Eddie Guerrero, whose death was just as tragic, he is in the Hall of Fame. But the narrator brings up a good point. Brian Pillman didn't have too much accomplishments in WWF compared to WCW. But moving on. She should be in.
I already spoke about Lex Luger, and it's pretty safe
She
to say
should
that
be
the
in.
circumstances surrounding Miss Elizabeth's untimely death will ensure she will never get inducted into the Hall of Fame, and that's a real shame.
Yes,
Liz
it is.
absolutely deserves her spot. Liz rose as a star in wrestling without hardly saying a word. Her natural beauty, class, and innocence made even the toughest of wrestling fans find a soft spot for Miss Elizabeth, and when Liz was in any kind of danger on TV, fans legit didn't want to see her come to any harm. It was incredible how she provoked these types of fan reactions by being what many would see as a typical damsel in distress.
Just being at ringside.
Wasn't your typical
That's all she had to do.
valet. While her real-life relationship with Randy Savage was troubled behind the scenes, many people will immediately think of Randy
I
at the
remember
wedding
that.
ceremony at SummerSlam 1991. The match made in heaven that made fans cry in the arena as Randy and Elizabeth, in storyline, tied the knot. The pair were already really married at the
They
time.
renewed
but
their
that still
vows.
doesn't take away from the fact that a wedding ceremony main evented a WWF pay-per-view. If that were to happen today, the company would get ridiculed, and that shows us how much people loved Miss Elizabeth, and Randy
Yep.
for that matter. Liz joined Macho once again. In
Yeah,
WCW
Randy too.
when things got off to
Macho
a rocky
Man too.
start. She turned her back on Macho to join Ric Flair and the Four Horsemen as a faction valet. She then joined the NWO unknowingly, and she became Hulk Hogan's little toy to play with. And she was given the Macho Man as a gift when Randy joined the New World Order. By this point, Liz seemed content to stay in the NWO, and she even became part of the NWO Wolfpack before taking a break and coming back for Lex Luger's Reborn run. Still considered today as one of the best female personalities in wrestling and a trendsetter in her own right, I 100% think that Liz should be inducted into the Hall of Fame.
Yes. If Macho Man isn't, she needs to be in. He could move.
One of the most talented big
He
men
may be
in
big
all
and
pro
fat, but he
wrestling
could
who
move.
changed the game, showing us that there's more to big guys than just power moves. Bam Bam was ridiculously agile for a guy his size, and he stood out with his flame ring attire and his tattooed head. All the makings for a wrestling champion, but Bigelow unfortunately didn't win a single championship belt in the World Wrestling Federation. He did, however, win the ECW World Heavyweight title and their TV title. And over in WCW, he captured the Tag Team Championship twice, once with DDP and once with Chris Kanyon. Together, all three were known as the Jersey Triad. Bigelow also won the WCW Hardcore title, but I'm not sure if that belt's ranked very highly. If you want to speak about high-ranking belts, though, Bam Bam also won the IWGP Tag Team Championship along with Big Van Vader.
There's a
He
pairing.
at a WrestleMania also, WrestleMania 11. Many people say that Bam Bam carried Lawrence Taylor through their match, but to be fair, Lawrence put in his fair share of work too. Many wrestling purists still didn't like the idea of of a celebrity main eventing WrestleMania, but it did give Bam Bam a chance to close the show, and hopefully it gave Bam Bam a decent payday too, so it wasn't all bad. Unfortunately, towards the end, Bam Bam was suffering from multiple health issues and he developed an addiction to opiate painkillers. He was reportedly in a bad way during the final months of his life and he died from an accidental drug overdose. A man who really doesn't need WWF title belts to be considered for an induction in my opinion, and a man who paved the way for other heavy superstars. Bam Bam Bigelow's career should be celebrated.
Yeah, he was a big man who could move. I mean, he could do cartwheels, everything. Time. I know the name. Jim Johnson, I know the name. All I'm going to say is, why is he not in? If they have... If people like Jim Ross and Howard Finkel, is Howard Finkel in the Hall of Fame? Probably. Jim Johnson deserves his own spot. Sorry, I just had a knee-jerk reaction.
I had a friend who wasn't into wrestling, and when we sat down to watch a show during the Attitude Era, he said to me that what he's watching is just like a rock concert with wrestling thrown in. That told me that while the wrestling wasn't doing much for him, the music and stage show appealed to him way more. His attention was grabbed by the entrances and big lights. The WWE has its own soundtrack that's evolved and changed throughout the years, but the absolute undisputed pioneer of wrestling music is Jim Johnston, the man who composed WWF themes that are still just as legendary today as the superstars themselves. Jim, I think, definitely deserves a spot in the Hall of Fame because not only did he create some insanely good music, but his music could help elevate a superstar's gimmick or persona. The glass shot for Steve Austin, the gong at the beginning of the Undertaker's theme, the driving guitar riff as the Ultimate Warrior rushes his way down to the ring, that bass line that lends itself to The Rock's swagger as he makes his entrance. There's so many more examples I could give around how Jim Johnston's music made superstars look and feel even better than they already were. Jim also wrote and composed many of the theme songs for WWF television shows and pay-per-views before the company started licensing music for their broadcasts. But it's the timeless pieces of music that played while the superstars made their way to the ring that will forever make Jim an unsung hero of the WWE and a man who absolutely deserves recognition with a Hall of Fame induction. I still can't believe they let Jim go, to be honest, after 32 years of service. Wrestling entrance themes don't hit as hard as what they used to. There are a few good ones out there, but Jim created hit after hit. Give him an induction already and thank the man for providing the whole company with a legendary soundtrack.
Yep.
While his work in the WWF was not his best by a country mile, the Raven character made an impact in ECW. While we can look back at the Raven gimmick nowadays and have a laugh about how brooding and easily annoyed the character was, at the time, Raven really was a reflection of the late 90s youth of society. His promos were good, his matches were good, and seeing as Paul Heyman was seemingly the only...
I never really watched Raven. I didn't watch ECW.
He decided to make Raven the main man in ECW. Raven would go on to become a two-time ECW champion, and he had the distinction of headlining the first ever ECW pay-per-view. ECW suited Raven as much as Raven suited ECW. The creative freedoms that Scott was afforded in the land of Extreme really let him unleash this Raven character, and it worked.
Maybe that's why he won't get in, because he never really made it in WWF.
Raven became a hot commodity, and it wasn't long until he'd sign a big money deal with World Championship Wrestling. At the time, WCW were throwing big money at top stars, and Raven got himself an excellent deal to begin working under Eric Bischoff and begin competing against the WWF. Unfortunately, though, something was missing in WCW. Raven wasn't spared the same time or given the same creative freedom in Atlanta, and although WCW tried with Raven's Flock and Raven Rules matches, the character lost a bit of his edge, I feel, when he went to WCW. His WWF run, I think, isn't even worth bringing up. You can clearly see what happens when a creative mind gets locked down by the machine here, and Raven, as a character, character was a shell of his former self. He was thrown straight into the hardcore division because ex-ECW guy equals hardcore wrestler in the eyes of Vince and company. Raven also had a run in TNA that was well received, and his feud with CM Punk also received critical acclaim, a feud that spanned across multiple promotions. For his work in ECW and the creative ideas behind the Raven gimmick, for helping others to establish their gimmicks too, and for his run in ECW alone as a complex and alternative yet highly engaging and compelling man,
that's why he won't get in.
A spot in the Hall of Fame.
Does he deserve it? Maybe.
WWF
but...
to go F themselves anyway if he got an invite.
Time. Yeah, I mean, he was big in ECW. I never watched ECW, so I can't speak to how big he was. When he was in WCW, I wasn't really impressed. That might have been for how they booked him more than anything. But, again, because he never really made a mark in WWE, he's not going to get in. So, moving on. He will get in. Heyman will get in.
I believe will get his induction. I think the company are just waiting for the day he decides to go home. But hopefully that day doesn't arrive anytime soon. Paul Heyman was
why is he on this list?
Individual in the world of pro wrestling, but man, when they talk about genius minds and having your finger on the pulse, as a promoter, Paul Heyman was revolutionary. The fact that he tapped into the underground wrestling scene and rose a promotion up through the dirt to create a globally recognized extreme wrestling organization is nothing short of brilliant. And while he took every shortcut known to man, and while he may have made promises he couldn't keep, the fact that ECW existed on the scale that it did speaks volumes on how smart the guy truly was and still is. There seems to be a disconnect sometimes with
he believed in the product too. So I mean,
the likes of Vince McMahon and Eric Bischoff seem to always be a little late when trying to capitalize on what was happening in the real world, or sometimes they would just swing and miss in spectacular fashion. Paul Heyman, on the other hand, tapped into what made teenagers and young adults tick in the 90s, and he done it in a way that didn't pander to the audience. Paul Heyman created a movement both for the fans and for the wrestlers involved in his shows. ECW and Paul Heyman paved the way for the WWF's Attitude Era, and still to this day, people talk about ECW even though the real ECW closed in 2001. When Paul moved to the World Wrestling Federation, he eventually became the head writer for SmackDown, and he pretty much made it a must-see program all on his own, thanks to his ability to see talent in underutilized superstars. SmackDown became the place to see good wrestling weekly while Paul was in control. And then, when Paul's on TV with his clients, his promos never miss. They never miss. With a real ability to...
He's good with a mic, no question.
Stop and listen. Heyman, in my opinion, should now be in the discussions as one of the greatest managers of all time. Certainly the best in the modern era for sure. As mentioned, I do believe Paul E will get his induction, but if it comes at the cost of losing him on TV, then I'd rather he stayed out of the Hall of Fame for as long as possible.
He'll get in eventually when he retires.
That'll do it then. Those were just 10 names, but I could mention more. Ivan Koloff, Jim Cornette, The Rockers, Earthquake, Tom Pritchard, Too Cool, The Nation of Domination, Jerry Lynn, Tony Schiavone. I've even heard people talk about Ted Turner getting an induction, and I think that would be pretty cool to see too. Again, these weren't in any sort of order. So
that will never happen.
Yeah, wrestling bios thinks Raven should go into the Hall of Fame before Ivan Koloff or stuff like that. These were just names that I wanted to talk about today, and maybe we can revisit this topic in the future. So let me know who you'd like to see get inducted in the comments. One last thing before closing the video. Hopefully the WWE extend the time of the Hall of Fame speeches. It looks like they're allocating just a few minutes for speeches now unless you're a big main event name, and that needs fixed. I know the Hall of Fame isn't for everyone and some fans couldn't care less, I know this, but for us that do, it would be nice if those time limits were lifted, unless your name's Hillbilly Jim. Thanks for watching guys, and take care.
Alright. Okay. Ted Turner getting in the WWE Hall of Fame? Yeah, right. That I don't see. Chris Benoit will get in the Hall of Fame before Turner does. And Benoit's about 1,000,000 to 1 long shot of ever getting in. I don't need to explain why either. Yeah, interesting. Like I said, I think... See, now that Vince McMahon's out of the picture, some of this might change. Luger, he might. If both sides have been talking and they've buried the hatchet, then he might. Remember, Bruno Sammartino for the longest time wanted nothing to do with it, and eventually he got in. Rick Martel, he, like I said, he was a mid-carder, but he was good at what he did. He was one of those guys that you loved to boo. You know, to put him in. Same with Bam Bam Bigelow. Maybe he didn't win a title, but he, you know, he didn't have that bad of a career. Jim Johnson, why is he not in? That's all I'm going to say about that. They fired him? I thought he just left. I didn't know that he was fired. That's... And again, yeah, Paul Heyman, he's a lock. He's just not retired yet, so... But that's going to do it for this video. It was interesting. You know, I got to admit. I am surprised he didn't mention Chris Benoit, though. Although, maybe he didn't want to touch that power kick. Not only that, I mean, that's kind of a no-duh, you know, entry on the list. But that's going to do it for this video. Please, if you have not subscribed, consider subscribing. It helps me out. It helps the channel grow. The more it grows, the more I can do. Also helps you out so you don't miss anything. Stay cool. Stay hydrated. And that will do it. Until you guys see you in the next video, please, as always, be good, be well, be safe, and be happy.